All right, great. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Brian Quinn. I am the editorial director of events for Skift. Each year for Skift Global Forum, we bring leaders from across travel to join. And this year, certainly it lives up to the global name with all of these discussions taking place over video with speakers joining from all over the globe. So across 3 days next week, September 21st through 23rd, we're going to have executive interviews and deep dive panels with Skift editors exploring the global economic and technology trends that are reshaping travel across aviation, hospitality, technology, destinations, OTAs, online booking, and more. All of this will also explore our global theme, the decade ahead, safeguarding travel's future. So as a preview for next week's discussions, we wanted to bring together our incredible editorial and research teams to provide an underpinning for the frank and transparent conversations that will be happening next week, focused on what will happen in 2021 and beyond. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to our editor-in-chief, Tom Lowry.
Thank you, Brian. Again, welcome to the Skift Global Forum Preview Roundtable. I'm joined, as Brian mentioned, I'm joined by the amazing pandemic-steeled research and edit teams who over the past 6+ months, in my less than humble opinion, have done the best work on travel, if not straight up business and economics coverage. We're also joined by our founder, Rafat Ali, today, who claims he's just here as an observer, but we'll see about that. So what have we been up to over these past months? Plenty. So let me just start out by highlighting some of what we've created and what we've attempted to do on the edit and research side. Let me start with our colleagues in research. So the research team, since the pandemic began, has created a lot of sort of proprietary offerings for our subscribers, including a Skift health index that maps out the 100 public companies in travel and where they stand in terms of the recovery. We also have a straight up recovery index, which takes data and analyzes it for, I think, 20+ destinations now. That is comes out monthly and just sort of is a gauge of where certain countries are in terms of their recovery. In addition, we've done surveys. We do a monthly travel tracker survey as well. And then we have our straight up reports, as you're used to, when we just had one out this morning from Wouter Geertz, who is our senior research analyst based in London. And the report is contactless tech and hospitality. The coverage has been broad in terms of the editorial coverage. I mean, we've questioned assumptions about the timing of the recovery. We've pondered the future of vacations. We've looked at marketing messages and how they evolved. We've even looked at kind of what this means for events and whether this is the Napster moment for events. We've looked at opportunities. Will there be new travel tech innovations that come out of this horrible period for travel? And is the world better off, let's say, with a travel industry that is, say, 20% smaller going forward? So there's a lot that has gone into our coverage over these last months. Today, I think our objectives are to stir up your curiosity, to get you interested in what our panelists will say next week, as well as if you know of colleagues, friends, clients that haven't signed up yet for Skift Global Forum, please encourage them to do so. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Brian Quinn to talk a little bit about next week's activities.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. So once again, we have an incredible lineup of speakers. If you've not seen, there's over 65 speakers joining, leaders from across the industry. We have many of the incredible companies that create the ecosystem of travel that we know. And of course, we're also very thankful to many of our sponsors who are joining for this event. But broadly, let's just cover the program itself. So opening the event will be Travel's Future Meets the Present World on Monday, September 21st. We'll kick it off with a Future of the Industry, a broad conversation with IAC and Expedia's Barry Diller. Then we'll have a discussion with Laurie Garrett, award-winning science writer, on the pandemic's path forward. Now, if you're not aware of Laurie's work, it's really incredible as a sage voice in terms of where pandemics have affected us globally over the years and decades she's been researching. So we're very excited to have that. We're also going to focus on work itself and adapting to this new remote world with Darren Murph, who's the head of remote at GitLab. It's a very interesting conversation to say, in this new world, what are the large changes that we might see, and not just what the work is, but how we work. So we'll be excited to have that. And then, of course, small businesses. We cannot ignore the fact that this pandemic has affected companies of all sizes. And we're going to hear from three small business founders and owners who have had to navigate unique changes in this time. I think it's going to be a very exciting this opening event and discussion, which will kick off our global state of the industry discussions happening on September 21st. So I'm going to quickly review these on a high level. We have talks from Marriott and Delta towards the beginning to kick things off, as well as a McKinsey research report that we've co-created with McKinsey and our Skift research team. So Heisha Wang will lead things, and we'll kind of indicate some of what may be to come in that. We'll allude to that at least. We're not going to give all of the insights away just yet, but you'll see that next week. We'll hear from Booking Holdings CEO, as well as Keith Barr and the president and COO of JetBlue and Accor. So our morning is jammed full with very high-level perspectives from CEOs globally who are trying to assess, what is next for not only the sectors but the industry and their respective companies. Our afternoon on the 22nd, we'll dive into destinations. We'll have discussions with two CEOs in Asia, Six Senses and Intrepid CEOs, Neil Jacobs and James Thornton, on sustainability. We will cover, towards the later of the afternoon, we'll cover also winning back traveler confidence. And I think this is one of the most transparent things that we've seen, is that it's a very fragmented industry, and how can we start to work together and be collaborative out of this crisis, especially right now when travelers really need to build back confidence. We'll close the State of the Industry Day with two CEOs, Scott Kirby, CEO of United Airlines, who was just added this week, and we're so thrilled to have him, and also Peter Kern, CEO of Expedia Group. Then on the 23rd, if you've not looked yet on the schedule, and all of this, of course, is available on the website, the forum website, we'll go through a series of deep dives. There are 5 different deep dives. The first one is rethinking destinations. We'll hear sort of aspirational discussions about fewer, better trips and how we reach some of these new bucket list travelers. We'll rethink tourism marketing with the CEOs of San Diego, Bermuda, and Singapore tourism. And we'll also hear from Destination Canada and Crowdriff about, local certainly has been a big theme throughout much of what we've heard through destinations. We also talk about scaling digital transformation. This has been a word that many of us in the acceleration have heard many times. What does it really mean, and how can we distill, what the practitioners across the industry are really seeing? We'll hear from the CIO of American Airlines, CMO of Wyndham, and head of global travel and hospitality at Publicis Sapient, and also the president of commercial and growth at MGM. So very excited for that. We will cover contactless in the afternoon as we start to close out our second day of full conference. We will hear from Ingenico Payments, as well as contactless from citizenM, Crichton, and Opti, who are 3 different companies that are obviously, citizenM has implemented this for years and done great work, but also sort of where is this evolving, and what do we need to keep in mind most as we think about touchless experience. Loyalty itself is very much in flux. We'll hear from leaders here from across United and Hyatt, and also some voices outside of travel. So we wanted to bring in some voices that are experts in retail to cover what are really the trends that we're seeing in loyalty. And we'll close out the day with perhaps one of the more impactful sectors that could help with travel's rebound, business travel. We'll hear from the CEO and president of Radisson Hospitality around his perspective from Europe and how they're enticing business travelers back, and then a roundtable with both buyers and TMCs closing out the day. So that's our program as a high level, and we encourage you to take a look through on the agenda and also on the SpotMe platform to bookmark much of these sessions. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Tom, and we're going to have the editors have some roundtable about what they're looking forward to hear.
Thanks, Brian. So the agenda today is that we want this to feel loose and conversational. We want you to feel like you're a guest at one of our daily edit and research meetings. Hopefully we'll be a little less profane than we normally are, but I wanted to kick this off. Dennis Shull is the founding and executive editor of Skift. So I'm gonna go to Dennis first and ask him what he hopes to learn next week from the forum that he doesn't know now. Dennis?
Thanks, Tom, who incidentally is the leader of our pack, the editorial pack, and chief choreographer, which we always appreciate. So I'm sure my fellow scribes will agree with me, although in our editorial meetings, you never know. But one of the things I'm looking for is some news. Look at the lineup we have. We have the CEOs of Delta, United, Accor, Marriott, Expedia, Booking Holdings, Barry Diller. So some of them will be telling tales out of school, I'm sure. So I'm looking forward to that. But in terms of other themes, I'm basically looking to see where the industry is and where it's heading. So I wrote a story yesterday about hotels making a comeback as it relates to vacation rentals, because vacation rentals have been the thing during the pandemic. That was based on Skift research. So I'm looking to see if the companies out there are seeing it the same way. I'm looking to see who's emerging with strength, how the competitive landscape is going to get shuffled. If there's any kind of a recovery timetable we could look at in these crazy times. And I'm also looking at companies reinventing themselves during the pandemic. Some of that is going on. And there are even companies that are pivoting away from travel. So I'm definitely looking to hear about that. So basically now I'd like to kick it over to our resident av geeks, Brian or Madhu, to see if they have what they're looking forward to seeing about airlines.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, it's an exciting agenda that we've got ahead of us, and we've got several high-profile airline executives that will be speaking at the conference. And I'm Brian. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about what you're expecting to see at the conference. I'm fully with Dennis. I hope and pray that they tell us tales out of school and that we learn something that wasn't prepped by the comms team. Brian, is there anything in particular you're hoping to hear from the airline people? And by the way, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Madhu Christian. I'm the editor of Airline Weekly, a Skift brand.
Brian?
I don't know if we have Brian. Well, some of the things that I'm looking for is, we have the CEO of Delta, which has taken a very sort of proactive approach to the pandemic by pledging to block its middle seats, and like all other airlines, talking about touting the steps it's taking to keep to clean aircraft and to allay passengers' fears as they travel during this public health emergency. But also Delta has taken slightly a different approach in that it's saying that it's pledging to be, it will be smaller and it will be sort of a more premium travel experience. Whereas some of the other airlines like American, Jet, and United are really rejiggering their networks to chase the leisure dollar and to be more like, as we've said in Airline Weekly, more like the low-cost carriers like the Allegiants and Southwests of the airline world. So that it'd be interesting to hear from both American and Delta and United to see how they're approaching this public health emergency in different ways. Brian, is there anything, now that we've got Brian, is there anything that you're hoping to hear? What in specific are you hoping to hear from this?
Well, given my technical difficulties of the last 3 minutes, I think that there's only one thing that I want to hear. I used to look forward to the Skift Global Forum every year to go toe-to-toe in person on stage with these top-tier executives. And now you all can't see it, but I have great lighting, microphone, headphones, spent a lot of money on this setup, and it conked out at exactly the wrong time. So I am curious to know about business travel and when that is going to come back. American Airlines, I think, said last week that business travel for them is down about 95%. There's some indications, I think Delta's been saying recently it's coming back just a little bit. But But look, American, Delta, United, these are not meant to be low-cost carriers carrying a lot of leisure travelers. They'll do it if they have to. They're going to do it now, but they need that business travel to come back. Maybe not 100%, maybe not even 50%, but is it going to be 10%, 20%? What's happening with that business travel? So in light of my technical difficulties, that's where my head is right now.
Thanks, Brian. So Matt, you're our corporate travel editor based in the UK. Give us your sense of what we're going to see in the next 6 months, year in terms of corporate travel.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the travel managers I've been talking to are saying at the moment the first step is let's get people back in the offices, back safely into work before we can start having this conversation. So it's very much up in the air. I think the kind of average number we're hearing is a kind of a 30% decrease once we get past this kind of tricky part. When there's a vaccine found. But I'm kind of like in terms of my takeaways, I'm like Dennis. I think I'm hoping we'll have some visibility on what business travel will look like in the near future, and then past COVID. I mean, we've got this dedicated deep dive on corporate travel on the 23rd. But like Dennis said, let's think about this. At the forum next week, we've got all these business leaders in the same virtual room, and it'd be great to hear their views on business travel's future. What are their plans for their own companies? Corporate travel plans in the future. I think that will give us quite a good picture. We might get a glimpse into future volumes, the types of trips, the destinations. All against this background of Zooming and working from home. And I think that would be really interesting to see. Pretty useful for the travel industry. So at the moment, it's a very wide open question. And yeah, I think the forum's going to hopefully shed quite a lot of light on this.
How important is the vaccine? This is for everybody. How important is the vaccine in the minds of travel executives and marketers? Is this going to be the catalyst, or is that sort of in some way a false promise in terms of travel's recovery, that once there's a vaccine, everything will go back to normal? What are you hearing, let's say, for example, in tourism with destinations, Rosie?
I don't know. I think that we might be too optimistic about the vaccine issue. I think I've heard a couple times that sort of widespread, even sort of daily, weekly testing is more perhaps promising. That you could take a test the morning you wake up to go on your trip. I mean, in the destination world, I think we've seen that there certainly are a subset of travelers who are very willing to travel in the middle of a pandemic. But unfortunately, that subset's not big enough to sustain a lot of these places, especially not as we move out of summer. But yeah, my personal opinion is that the vaccine, even if we get one soon, it's certainly not a silver bullet, and that testing may be more accessible and more instantaneous results. Testing may be more of a silver bullet than we realize.
And who are you? Who are you, Rosie? Tell us who you are.
Sorry about that. I am the global tourism reporter for Skift.
Can I just add something? This is Seth. I'm one of our senior research analysts, and my colleague Walter and I. Just a funny anecdote. We were having a conversation about when COVID will be under control. And for context, I'm based in New York and Walter is based in London. And I was kind of implicitly assuming under control meant a vaccine. And Walter pointed out to me, he said, well, actually, in my mind, when under control means doesn't have nothing to do with a vaccine. People can return to travel at a different time. And so I think that question, this is a global forum, right? The question totally depends on where you're sitting too, in terms of country level, and even for business travel, maybe vaccines more important than for leisure travel because there's more liability on the line. So I think it's just such a nuanced question in terms of I think it can definitely happen without a vaccine, but it's I don't know, it depends where you sit.
Wouter, with that, you oversee our recovery index. Talk a little bit about some of the unevenness that you see. I mean, Seth is talking about perceptions being different in different parts of the world. Give us having done this now, 3 or 4 of these recovery indexes, monthly indexes, give us your idea of where we are in terms of, sort of this unevenness of the recovery.
Yeah, I mean, so we update the data actually every week, but we write a monthly report. So Yeah, like you say, there is a lot of unevenness. There's, in terms of sectors, there's massive unevenness. So Drive, the car rental industry, was performing very well. We see it slowing down a little bit now. Air, as Brian and Madhu have already hinted at, is rock bottom and hasn't really, since the beginning of April, hasn't really seen too much growth. Accommodation is actually doing pretty well. So from that point of view, but then within accommodation, like Dennis said as well, what's the dimension between hotels and vacation rentals? So there's a lot of stuff, I think, that hopefully next week we'll learn a little bit more about in those terms as well. I think from a country or regional point of view, there's also some interesting stuff that we're seeing. In our index, China is performing reasonably well, but I don't think it's performing as well as some people put it on a pedestal as the way forward. There's still definitely a lot of lag and a lot of lost revenue there as well. Actually, I think, Tom, one of your favorite stories that I put out from the index was the fact that Russia is actually performing the best in our index. So Russian travelers really want to travel. We saw a massive increase when they opened up to Tanzania, I think, of all countries. So it really depends on the country. And actually, the US is performing quite well because they didn't have the very strict lockdown. They didn't, so people are still traveling. Whereas in Europe, we've seen a far harder dive, if you like, but also better recovery since.
Let's talk about hotels, because I think I know the team here pretty well, and I know your travel habits the last 6 months. And I don't think there's anybody on the team here that stayed in a hotel since the pandemic began. But Cameron, give us a snapshot. We're going to have some major hotel executives at the forum next week. First of all, give us your view of where hospitality stands right now, and what you're hoping to hear from some of these executives next week.
Yeah, hey y'all, I'm Cameron Sparron, Skift's hospitality reporter. Right now, kind of echoing what everyone has said so far, it honestly depends on where in the world you are as to how your hotel industry is doing. It's not really a blanket performance right now. China is definitely the furthest ahead. If you talk to Marriott, they could be back to 2019 levels of occupancy and revenue by the end of next year. Europe started the furthest behind. US is somewhere in the middle, but there is kind of now this question of, could Europe, I don't know, dig out of its hole faster than the US is? It's really kind of it's so staggered. Now you have this threat of a second wave. So the hotel industry is just really continues to have a giant question mark on it. So, I mean, I'm really going to be interested to see from the individual companies where things stand, what they're expecting. I'm also going to be curious if, based on how China has outperformed the rest of the world, if that causes any of them to change growth strategies to focusing more on China than they ever have before, just given how it has contained the virus better than the US and other parts of the world. The other thing I'm looking forward to, and kind of piggybacking on your question earlier, Tom, about how important is the vaccine, are convention hotels. I mean, that really rests on a lot of people coming back together. We've seen auto shows hosted once again in China and South Korea, admittedly at a smaller scale, but I mean, it's still previously planned 100,000 person audiences are 50,000. And I mean, that's still very impressive right now. But I don't know if it's going to necessarily hinge on a vaccine. I mean, I've heard Vegas resort companies are focusing on having point of contact testing where you get the results pretty much at the door. That's really a huge psychological boost of making people feel safe if everyone's getting a negative reading going into a conference. So I'm curious if some of these hotel companies are similarly looking to do that for their bigger hotels in a place like New Orleans or Las Vegas. So, yeah.
And is there a sense of reality from the hotel executives that you talk to that the event industry will just not return to the scale it was before?
It's kind of the opposite. A lot of them say they expect group business travel to come back in full force. I talked to the president of Omni recently, and that's a company that is very much rooted in convention hotels, and they still see a bright future ahead, especially as
companies may work permanently remote. They're going to expect that when they do want to get together, it's going to be at a big event once a quarter.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't go to Rafat on this, because Rafat has written a piece about the event industry facing its Napster moment. Rafat, what do you think about the view that Cam just articulated from some of the executives he's talked with?
Oh, sorry, I really have to speak? Okay. All right, let me try. Okay, well, thank you, folks. Thank you. Let me just dial back a tiny bit. I want to thank Brian, who you saw early on. Has been busting everything he has for the, I don't know, last month, 2 months, working on this. Regina and others behind the scene that you're not seeing, obviously, here on camera. Everybody has just been working. Anybody who said, let me answer your question this way. Anybody who's ever said that virtual events are a lot easier has not done a good one before. So it is a lot of work. Certainly the physicality is in there, but there's just a lot of coordination that is required. And a lot has gone into what you're seeing now, and we'll see over the next 2 days as well. So thank you, our team, for all the effort you guys put in. So your question was, Tom, events. Yes.
I just said that there's an overly bullish view about the event industry coming back even stronger than before.
Yeah, well, many of you have read my article, essay that I wrote, I think a couple of weeks ago, on the event industry going through its Napster moment. And I think, as with any disruption, we always overestimate in short term and underestimate in the long term. This is a big cliche. And the answer somewhere lies in the middle. I do think that if the economics of the events industry, which were hugely profitable before this, for all players that Cameron mentioned in the ecosystem, will definitely get eroded. And I think that is the key part, which is the economics for hotels and venues and production companies and planners and organizers and owners and every other person in the ecosystem, every other chain will definitely see a change. And I think tech, if we think Zoom and SpotMe and all the other tech that we're using for this is the cutting edge tech, wait another 3 to 5 years from now, we'll be in a whole different world. So I think that is where I'm excited about. Obviously, it's hurt our business quite a bit, not having the physical events, but I am very bullish on whatever tech's going to come and how that will enhance the experience itself and the hybrid nature of what it is for the industry.
Let me stay with that theme. Sean, I don't think you go through anything like this pandemic and not have opportunities that have been created. So can you talk a little bit, you're our senior travel tech editor. Talk a little bit about your coverage and what you've seen in terms of people being opportunistic, particularly on the technology front.
Yeah, I definitely want to see a takeaway of whether who's going to be opportunistic in this. I mean, we've seen, Cameron has reported in the hotel sector that a lot of the major global brands have been really good on the contactless tech and sort of adapting quickly. But if you're in the limited or economy budget sectors farther down the scale, a lot of them don't have the tech resources for this. So it'll be interesting to hear out of this conference when we hear from Wyndham CMO and others, whether some of that tech is going to trickle down. I think there's also sort of a theme of how can the tech companies that service the travel industry, how are they going to help them sort of preserve what we like in hospitality? Because before the crisis, high touch was like a symbol of like luxury and being a very hospitable experience. And now in a pandemic, you want low touch. And so I was talking with someone last week who had stayed at a major hotel brand hotel. And when they went to check into the front desk, there's this huge barrier, plexiglass. They're practically shouting at the guest agent, in order to complete the check-in process. And then the agent comes behind this barrier and presents on a silver tray the room keys. And I think there's an opportunity for a lot of the tech companies to try to resolve some of it, sort of blend the best of tech where mobile is your remote control to your travel experience. There's a lot of tech that needs to get there in order to help the industry get to that point, because we're clearly, based on the comments that we've heard earlier, we're in this for the long haul beyond waiting for a vaccine. So I'm interested to hear some of the tech players have been better resourced during this crisis and to see how it is that they're going to try to rise to this challenge.
Great. So as a backdrop against all of this, we have Airbnb going public. So Dennis, can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing? What's the current status of that? Again, we had hoped to have them at the forum, but they're in a quiet period because of that IPO. Dennis, give us what you know so far on the Airbnb IPO, as well as what's going on with online travel.
Well, of course, they filed for their IPO, but they haven't released any information yet. And I'm actually paranoid that they're going to release their S1 like on Tuesday of our forum when I'm going to be busy. But that being said, one of the main things I want to get out of my interviews is what impact will the Airbnb IPO have on competitors like Booking.com and Expedia Group? I noticed, for example, that in the last earnings call, Booking Holdings, for the first time that I can remember, disclosed the percentage of short-term rentals that they had booked. They don't usually provide that kind of transparency. It was like 40% of all bookings. So I'm wondering, once Airbnb IPOs, and this talk that this could happen, by next month, they could be a public company, depending on market conditions and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if they had stopped doing investments in hotels. They had acquired Hotel Tonight last year, but when they laid off a quarter of their workforce, they stopped investing in hotels. So I'm sure they have a lot of private equity money. If they get a lot of funding, through an IPO, perhaps they'll reinvigorate their hotel business, which right now is weak. So, I'm thinking, things could really change. I don't know, Seth, you think I'm hallucinating again, or do you think it's basically the status quo once Airbnb IPOs?
No, I think that's a spot on thought, Dennis, is that once they're a public company, I think in terms of the pressure and we were talking about this morning, Dennis, about the outside inquiries and stuff that they're getting. I don't think they've seen anything yet in terms of the tough questions they're going to get and the growth expectations they're going to be held to. And I think it'll be hard for them to not invest in things like hotel and even experiences once that happens. I'm also just very interested to see how the OTAs are going to return to growth in general. We're going to have Booking Holdings and Expedia here, speaking next week, and it's a new world for them. I think they traditionally would win in this environment, right? Because they're the low cost guys, they're the mass reach, the big distribution guys. But I think what's happened is we kind of have two crises. There's an economic crisis and a health crisis. OTAs win in an economic crisis, but do they necessarily win in a health crisis? Do you trust that the booking that you're going to get from this anonymous third party is going to be as safe as booking directly? So those are some big fault lines I'm going to be interested to hear about, even outside of the Airbnb, back in the traditional accommodation space.
But I have to point out, in the Skift Health Score, Skift Research analyzed 100 public companies, and Booking Holdings came out on top, the #1 public company in terms of strength and survivability, et cetera. So they look to be in good shape.
There's no doubt they're a very well-run company. They're a very strong company, very well-run. Keep in mind, if you're an online travel agency, all of your costs are effectively variable costs that you can play around with. Their biggest costs are marketing and personnel. And sad as it is, you can cut both of those things. Whereas if you're an airline, you still gotta, you bought those planes, you still gotta pay for those planes. If you're a hotel owner, you have a mortgage, so those costs don't go away. Whereas for an OTA, they can just, bring their costs down commensurate with what they're doing. So no doubt they're a really strong company for this.
And as Rosie knows, all those cruise lines are just hanging around with no passengers. So that's pretty incredible too.
Still raising plenty of money, so somehow.
And still booking trips even though they're not sailing.
What's your prognosis, Rosie? You've covered the cruise industry for a long time. It would seem to me that of the sectors that are the hardest hit and that will have the hardest time coming back, cruise has got to be, if not at the top of the list, close to the top of the list. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think certainly the kind of unbridled optimism of the industry growing and growing, it's got to go. Carnival this week said it was offloading some of its ships in the US. I mean, there's definitely enough people who are not only willing to cruise again, but feel aggrieved that they aren't allowed to right now. There's a vocal group of people online who feel that way. So I certainly think they still have a business. It's just that they're in a really tough spot because they're an inherently non-essential industry. They're not like airlines. They're not even really like hotels. So the authorities in the US, where a huge, if not most of their market is, the sense is that the CDC is just not in a huge rush to get them back. So I definitely think the cruise industry will be a smaller one when they do finally sail again.
Great. Well, we've seen some public companies do some creative finance measures, including Delta, which Brian Summers wrote about this week on the loyalty front. Brian, can you kind of explain what Delta did and what that means for their operations going forward?
Yeah, the inside joke the last few years was that the loyalty companies that these airlines were running were actually more profitable than the core airline. And now we're seeing that made some sense. So we've seen Delta and United come out, and they basically take their loyalty programs, turn them into a third-party entity, a subsidiary, incorporate them in the Cayman Islands, and then borrow money against the value of them. We have a lot of smart people probably watching and listening here, so they probably know why these programs are so valuable. But essentially, it all has to do with these credit card partnerships. So for Delta, it's American Express. For United, it's Chase. These credit card companies pay airlines a ton of money, billions of dollars for use of these miles, which they then go ahead and award to customers. Interestingly, the airlines say, airline revenue is way, way down right now, but credit card revenue is pretty close to where it was. It's down a little bit, maybe about 5%, Delta said. But the bottom line is people are still spending on American Express credit cards. And amazingly, they're keeping their Delta credit cards. There's a lot of wanderlust in travel. That's why we're all in it, right? We all think about our travel. And it seems like even now in the depths of the pandemic, when a lot of people don't want to think about travel, at least for the far future, they want to amass those credit card points. So when this is over, they can use them. And that's been pretty good for airlines. So that's the way we're thinking about loyalty now. There's also the other arm of loyalty, right? How do you get people to come back to the airline that they left? That's another story entirely.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So Rafid, what do you, I was remiss in asking you what you hope to hear next week at the forum.
Yeah, let me point out there are a couple of names that are missing. Obviously, Airbnb we discussed. They're missing not for lack of us inviting them. It's because they're in a quiet period for their IPO, and then also the mainstream cruise industry. I know the Lindblad founder and CEO speaking, but the mainstream cruise industry is, let's just say, not in love with our coverage of the cruise industry over the years. And so obviously for good reason. And so that's why they're not there as well. And so there are a couple of topics that I personally am interested in. I know each of you are interested, and Skift is interested as well. Obviously the racial reckoning that's been happening has happened over the last few months in America, obviously again and again, but finally now, and with George Floyd's death, and obviously all the others as well, and us asking CEOs and companies in the travel space on their commitment. Obviously, we've covered the lack of diversity for years now, and so I think finally there's potentially good movement on it. So we'll continue to ask all the speakers. We've put together, I would humbly say, probably the most diverse pipeline of speakers that we've over-indexed in all possible ways from the industry itself. That's my son knocking in the background, by the way. And it's locked, so he's not going to be able to get in. The small business part, this is personal, obviously, as a company that is small business and going through the pains that we're going through. Oh, I'm on a video call. So we had to have those moments, right? And so the small business part, which I'm going to interview the small business founders. There's the backstories. These are all the founders that have spoken at our previous forums. And I'm going to interview them on the opening day and talk about how they've navigated the last 6 months and how do they see the support happening over the, how do they see themselves faring, and how do they see support from various parts of the industry for small business, which I think is still lacking in so many different ways.
Great. Thank you, Rafat. Brian, do you want to take us out on this?
No, I think this was great, guys. What a nice conversation, way to kick off things for next week. We're excited, of course, to hear these interviews and even the preparation. It's been really fascinating to hear the sentiments and thinking across the industry with these speakers. So very excited. Reminder to everyone to join us. It's forum.skift.com if you've not yet registered. And if you have, great. And we'll hope to see you, both for Monday night's opening event and those discussions, as well as early on the 22nd when we kick off our full day. So really going to be exciting. And thank you again.